Sometime in the summer of 2021, I came across a clip from Late Night with David Letterman. In the clip, he was interviewing a comedian I thought I knew from somewhere, but just wasn't sure. Soon enough, I came to discover the sarcastic and no-limits comedian Norm Macdonald, and I watched every single one of his appearances on David Letterman. Only a few months later would I learn while watching another Norm highlight reel that we had lost one of the most unique and cult-followed comedic icons we've yet to see. It seemed to me the masses never quite got to know the man who turned heads with his deadpan style, sarcastic delivery, and numbness to embarrassment. In this video, I want to take a look at Norm Macdonald, at his life and career, and tell a more complete story of the comedian some of you may know well, or hardly at all. My name is Lee Brees, and this is Modern Legends, Episode 1. Norman Jean Macdonald was born on October 17, 1959, to Fern and Percy Macdonald in Quebec City, Canada. His father, Percy, was born in 1916 and served in the Canadian Army in World War II. Macdonald was the middle child of three brothers, with his older brother Neil going on to have great success as a Canadian broadcast journalist. His parents were both teachers, and the family lived at Canadian Forces Base Valcartier, a military base only 8 miles north of Quebec City, and where Norm would have his own father as one of his teachers. Throughout his childhood, he always showed interest in sports through hockey, and was also interested in comedy, and recalls seeing David Letterman live in person at age 13 as a significant moment in his life, in addition to recalling several other sports and comedy-related childhood memories. While what we know about Norm's educational background is limited to what he shared through interviews and his act, he claims to have attended Quebec City High School before transferring to Gloucester High School, graduating 2 years early around age 15. He says he then studied at Carleton University, also in Ottawa, before dropping out. After that, he did various odd jobs including working on a ship, working for a logging company, and working as an insurance underwriter. Multiple classmates confirmed that he later attended the broadcasting and journalism program at Algonquin College around 1980, which he also didn't finish. Neil Macdonald later recalled that his brother had an interest in pursuing the truth, but was hoping it would be within walking distance. Even though he didn't finish, Norm would meet another student, Randy Dash, who proved to be a valuable friend early on in his comedic career. It was at this point that Macdonald decided to invest more of his time in pursuing comedy, in particular, stand-up. He started out doing amateur nights at Yuck Yucks on Albert Street in Ottawa. His first performance at the club was mostly typical, you could say, for someone performing stand-up for the first time, but Norm felt very unsatisfied with his act and had been extremely nervous. After the show, he stormed out, destined to never perform stand-up again, but the club's owner, Howard Wagman, successfully persuaded him to come back and try again, as he and the crowd thought the performance went quite well. Macdonald would later testify that it took a while to build up the courage and confidence in comedy, as he was naturally shy and introverted. Despite the quirks, and contrary to most comedians, Norm Macdonald was an instant success, and his friend Randy Dash would soon after begin bringing a video camera to clubs across the area as his comedic career continued to expand. In the summer of 1986, after continued work in Canada's comedy circuit, he participated in the largest comedy festival in Canada, the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, which would air a special later on in September, and Macdonald was a handful of comedians that passed the final edits. He received praise for his performance, and offers for television and comedy specials soon followed. However, he was forced to take the following year off from comedy after having been diagnosed with a severe gastrointestinal disorder. After recovering, he realized he needed to be closer to the center of the entertainment industry in order to grow his career, and in 1988, Dash would help Macdonald produce a 16-minute tape as he hoped to land a gig in the entertainment industry in the U.S. Also in 1988, Norm would marry Connie Valancourt, a family therapist, and little else is known about the context of their relationship. Norm instantly shot to great success in Los Angeles, playing many of the notable comedy clubs, and was able to secure a performance on Late Night with David Letterman. Shortly after moving to Los Angeles and focusing on his stand-up, he was hired as a writer for the new Dennis Miller Show. Tribune Entertainment approached the former Saturday Night Live cast member Dennis Miller with a proposal for an alternative talk show to compete in the then contentious late-night television. The show would have guests and featured a newscast segment similar to Weekend Update from Saturday Night Live. The Dennis Miller Show premiered on the CW network on January 20th, 1992, and was canceled only 7 months later due to poor ratings. Even with the show's brief run, it still gave McDonald a resume in the entertainment industry and a list of connections which allowed him to secure a role as a writer on Roseanne, a sitcom that ran on ABC. Norm was hired to write for the show for the 1992-93 seasons, contributing to episodes of Mice and Men and Lose a Job, Winnebago. He would stay on as a story editor for the first 4 episodes of the 1993 season before achieving the next landmark in his career, a coveted spot on the hit show Saturday Night Live for its 19th season. And in the same year, he and his wife Connie would also have a son named Dylan. Norm was originally brought on as a writer, but fellow Canadian and SNL producer Lorne Michaels was known to give writers a chance to perform if they were funny, and Norm was credited as both a featured player and a writer for his first season. McDonald would make several notable impressions in his first season, including Larry King, Burt Reynolds, David Letterman, Quentin Tarantino, and Bob Dole, all of which would not just be notable characters from McDonald, but become some of the most remembered in SNL history. His impressions led him to great success in his first season, and was granted repertory status for SNL's 20th season. He was also given the role of anchor of the show's Weekend Update segment after the departure of Kevin Nealon, who anchored the fake news segment for the past 3 seasons and still remained on SNL for 1 more year. It was in this role many discovered McDonald's deadpan style, sarcastic humor, and mischievous delivery. He became known as a comedian who didn't seem like he cared whether people found the joke funny or not, and no one was off the table to crack a joke about. Through countless appearances and interviews, it was hard to tell whether his style was an authentic representation of his personality, or if it was all just an act. Over the course of the next 3 years, he continued to make a name for himself in the segment, in addition to participating in traditional sketches on the show. He made jokes and took shots at public figures like Michael Jackson, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and most notably, O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was a former NFL player who was charged for the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman. O.J. was more than a football player, however, as he had many endorsement deals going on at any given time and was admired by the media. His trial captivated the U.S. as never seen before and was also very polarizing. McDonald chose to use the popularity of the trial and situation to his advantage by frequently poking fun at O.J. and the trial, including calling him a murderer. Even after the trial, McDonald continued his series of jokes. Don Ohlmeyer, the president of NBC's West Coast division, was a good friend of O.J. Simpson and held a party for the jurors who acquitted him. In early 1998, almost 2.5 years after the trial, Ohlmeyer decided to remove McDonald from his role as anchor of Weekend Update and fired the segment's main writer at the same time. Ohlmeyer cited failing ratings and decreasing quality of the segment. McDonald remained on the show and performed in sketches, but the move was very controversial, and McDonald disliked just being in sketches. At this point, he had become a regular on David Letterman's late-night television talk shows, who was now hosting The Late Show with David Letterman on CBS. Shortly after the firing, Norm said as a guest on the show that Ohlmeyer fired him because of his O.J. Simpson jokes, and much of Norm's reaction to the situation was expressed through his appearances with David Letterman. Ohlmeyer fired back, saying McDonald was wrong. Ratings research had showed people turning away from the show during the Weekend Update segment, and McDonald was increasingly making the audience feel uncomfortable. Years later, Norm would yield to Ohlmeyer and was convinced he was fired for insubordination. Nonetheless, the decision plagued the executive throughout the rest of his time at NBC, and his issues with the comedian wouldn't stop after Norm left SNL. By February 1998, Norm had left the show and was now entering his post-SNL career. In the same month, he would have one of his most memorable gigs hosting the 1998 ESPY Awards, where he ended his opening monologue with another O.J. Simpson one-liner. Later in the year, he co-wrote and starred in what was quipped a revenge comedy called Dirty Work, directed by friend Bob Saget, and featured Artie Lange and SNL co-star Chris Farley in what would be his final film. Don Ohlmeyer went on a tirade to silence promotion of the film and had ads for it blocked on NBC, to which his bosses would later overrule, but kept the ban on for Saturday Night Live. McDonald also suspected that Ohlmeyer was behind canceling several of his appearances on various NBC talk shows, regardless of whether they were to promote the film. When asked about Ohlmeyer and the situation, McDonald replied, "This guy should get a life, man." Dirty Work received mostly negative reviews, with the Los Angeles Times describing the film as tone-deaf. And today, the film has a 14% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes. In 1999, he would get his own sitcom that aired on ABC called The Norm Show, co-starring Laurie Metcalf, Artie Lange, and Ian Gomez. The show followed Norm Henderson, a former NHL hockey player who was banned for life after issues with gambling and tax evasion, and as a result, was required to serve 5 years as a social worker. The show achieved rating success during its first season, but in subsequent years, ABC tampered with its time slot, resulting in fluctuating ratings before moving it to Friday night, also known as the Friday Night Death Slot, and the show never recovered and was canceled after 3 seasons in May 2001. On October 23, 1999, Norm made his return to Saturday Night Live, this time as host. He said in his monologue that he had been fired the year prior for not being funny enough, and attributed the show becoming very bad as to why he was asked to host, as now he was funny enough. It was also in 1999 that McDonald and his wife would separate and later divorce. Norm would continue his stand-up, daytime and late-night television talk show appearances, and would make many cameos in film and television, such as The People vs. Larry Flynt, Screwed, Family Guy, and The Fairly Odd Parents. He was given another chance at a sitcom in 2003, this time on Fox, and was called A Minute with Stan Hooper, but was canceled after 6 episodes. 2 years later, he tried again on Comedy Central with Back to Norm, but never got past a pilot. The rest of the new millennium's first decade saw Norm do various commercials and ad campaigns, a sports show and comedy special on Comedy Central, roast Bob Saget, be a guest judge and guest host on various shows, and even return as a frequent guest on Conan O'Brien's brief run as host of The Tonight Show. In 2006, he released a comedy album called Ridiculous. Despite all the activity, however, it was clear he hadn't become the most successful of his SNL cast class and was drifting toward cult following rather than mass admiration. It would be until 2013 before he had another breakthrough, this time co-hosting a podcast called Norm Macdonald Live with Comedy Club manager Adam Egget on the Video Podcast Network. The show streamed weekly on the site before being posted later on YouTube. Despite having a limited audience, USA Today and Entertainment Weekly gave it positive reviews from critics, saying Norm was still a comedy force to be reckoned with, and the show continued through 2017. In 2015, David Letterman had announced he was retiring from late-night television and therefore ending The Late Show with David Letterman after 23 seasons. Norm had become a regular on the show and was considered one of the best reoccurring guests, whether he was performing stand-up or just recalling funny stories on the couch. On his final appearance on the show, he recalled seeing David Letterman for the first time live at age 13 and broke down crying at the end of his stand-up and told David Letterman that he truly loved him. Norm hadn't revealed to anyone before the show what he was going to say, which Letterman didn't like, and Letterman was certainly not someone who liked sappiness, but surely he was tolerant of the situation. After success with Norm Macdonald Live, Letterman helped Norm sell his show to Netflix, who announced they had ordered 10 episodes of the series, this time called Norm Macdonald Has a Show, and the episodes were released on September 14th, 2018. The show had mixed reviews, and the streaming service never did order any more episodes. Throughout the 2010s, McDonald would continue performing as a nightclub comic. He would release 2 more comedy specials, he would write a mostly fictional comedic memoir, he would be a judge on Last Comic Standing, have recurring roles in TV shows, and produce the revival of Roseanne. He also would live out a gambling addiction that lost him all of his money on 3 separate occasions, but I guess in the end, he made it out all right. In 2020, he turned to tech and released a dating app with friend Vivek Jain called Loco that relies on video chats with matches, and the app has had mixed success early on. It's not clear what prompted Norm to the dating app scene, but signature to his style, it's impossible to tell whether it's a joke or not. On September 14th, 2021, 3 years after the release of his Netflix show, Norm Macdonald passed away at the age of 61 from acute leukemia at a hospital in Pasadena, California. He had been diagnosed 9 years prior to his death, but limited the diagnosis to a small group of family and friends, as to prevent impacting how the public perceived him. He would be cremated, and the ashes were given to a family member. Norm Macdonald was a stand-up comedian from a small town in Canada who finished his career far from where he started, but never seemed to catch a big break like so many of his other SNL castmates did. Just a bunch of little breaks along the way. His signature style was often polarizing, some loved it and others hated it, but I'm sure if you followed the comedian throughout his career, you have a favorite bit somewhere in there. To me, there wasn't a better late-night talk show guest during the peak of late-night television than Norm. He always had a funny story prepared, or could help make any tame interview be anything but. He never thought comedy and show business went together, but he was thrust into the other anyway, and he did pretty okay, I guess. I just think he loved comedy for its purity, and preferred the stage at a club, or maybe even the couch on television, but always as a solo act. Which wasn't what fans expected who only knew him from TV. It's sad to see him pass on so early, but at least we have an endless supply of YouTube clips to carry us on. Thank you, Norm. And on that note, thank you for watching. Subscribe to Labrise TV for more Modern Legends content. And be sure to comment what modern legend you'd like us to cover next.